President, we have a national emergency.
This is one of the things that we can shoot first and ask questions later. Normally you can't do that.
All of a sudden these trees started moving out of the way. They parted for me. And then I came out into this opening, and there where I saw Jesus Christ.
Back in 1927, an American socialist, Norman Thomas, 6-time candidate for president on the Socialist Party ticket, said the American people would never vote for socialism. But he said under the name of liberalism, the American people will adopt every fragment of the socialist program. He is more imminent.
James Madison, in 1788, speaking to the Virginia Convention, said, "Since the general civilization of mankind, I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachment of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations."
When men were free.
Broadcasting live from a secret location buried deep below the earth, you're about to make a connection to the signs of the times. W. Dean Shook is live on the air right now.
And welcome into End Time News. I'm your host, W. Dean Shook. Thank you for being here. We're going to have a program that's a little bit different today. As in, this is not just going to be headlines like I do quite a bit. This is going to be more of a discussion because in the title of today's program, I put "The people are being hoodwinked." Now, why would I say something like that? Because I think we're being distracted for a reason. And I think while we're being distracted, they're doing some pretty dastardly things in the background. Things that we don't agree with but haven't spoke about in quite a while. And I'm going to give some examples of that happening. So let me start this with something I found on news.com, and then I'll get to the one that actually flew in my face that sparked this whole thing. News.com is saying that the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, which is a group founded by the creators of the atomic bomb, they say the world is now 3 minutes from a catastrophic midnight and the closest it's been in 30 years. The clock moved forward 2 minutes, citing global warming and the proliferation of nuclear weaponry as the world's largest threats. Bulletin Executive Director Kenneth Benedict said this is about doomsday. This is about the end of civilization as we know it. Well, that sounds pretty serious, doesn't it? He said the probability of global catastrophe is very high. The actions needed to reduce this risk of disaster must be taken very soon. Well, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists was created in 1945, and the clock first appeared 2 years later on the Bulletin's magazine cover. The minute hand was moved as far as 17 minutes from midnight in 1991, but was once just 2 minutes away in 1953. The last time the clock was at 3 minutes before midnight was in 1983 during the Cold War between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Now, Richard Somerville, he's a member of the 20-unit board of scientists at the Bulletin, said the burning of fossil fuels will lead to a major climatic disruption globally. The urgency has nothing to do with politics or ideology. It arises from the laws of physics, biology, and chemistry. Well, apparently, Mr. Somerville doesn't have a television or a radio and hasn't seen the news, but climate change is pretty low on the list considering ISIS and Russia and China and everything that's going on. However, while we're distracted, they're taking advantage of every minute of that. But you know, this clock may be right, but not for the reasons that they say. You know, I read conservative blogs and I listen to conservative talk shows who are doing a lot of shows on the fact that we're losing our rights. It's all about the nuts in the government and the other places that keep pushing these weird un-American things, Big Brother, gay marriage, gun rights, immigration, the list goes on and on. But what's being missed here is what they're doing behind the scenes while we're focused on all of these things. We're being distracted while these globalists are implementing their agenda right under our noses. So let's face it, they're never going to be able to take our guns. It's a settled matter that we have this right. Gay marriage, if someone wants to be gay, That's their business. They can be gay till the cows come home. Gay marriage is a joke because God created marriage. It's a covenant between a man and a woman and their God. Government has no business even being involved in marriage at all. It's all for the money and the regulations. Now, if gay people want to be married, it's not because they want a covenant between them and God, because God's not going to sanction that. It's for the tax advantage. It's for the money. And it's to push the idea that gay marriage is natural and normal. Well, the fact is, no matter what anyone does, I'll never accept that gay marriage is natural or normal because the plumbing doesn't fit. Gay marriage defeats the purpose of marriage, which is to have this covenant with God and reproduce children. And the fact is, the more we focus on these things, the more we're doing exactly what they want. That's to keep us looking the other way, to not be watching what they're doing. And we're going to explore that right here, right now. So let's put all of these issues aside for a little bit and see what's going on behind the curtain. And this is the story that really jumped out and slapped me right in the face. And I'm going to tell you this story and then we're going to talk about it. This is according to the Daily Caller. Vice President Al Gore and former Mexican President Felipe Calderon are pushing for $90 trillion, trillion with a T, $90 trillion in spending to ban cars from every major city in the world and make them more dense. Now, Gore and Calderon presented a report from the Global Commission on the Economy and Climate. They argued that fighting global warming will require making cities more compact and reliant on public transportation. They say this is the only way to make sure urban areas don't contribute to global warming. Calderon and Gore argued that $90 trillion is going to be spent anyway in the coming decades upgrading cities around the world. They argue it should be spent on making cities more climate friendly. Calderon told the Insider that the mistake we made in Mexico was to let cities develop however they want. And it's a mess. Well, their study says that more compact, better connected cities with strong mass transit systems will help policymakers tackle these pressing challenges. Such cities are more productive, socially inclusive, resilient, cleaner, quieter, and safer. The study says 70% of the world's energy use and greenhouse gas emissions come from the cities. Reducing emissions from ever-growing urban areas will show the goals of the economic growth and climate change can work together. Calderon and Gore made their presentation at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland, where, ironically, or maybe not so ironically at this point, some 1,700 private jets, which use petroleum, were used to shuttle in conference participants and others to discuss global warming and other pressing global issues. Really? There was such a big influx in traffic. Newsweek says that the Swiss military had to open an air base for private jets to land. And last year's meeting, some 200 helicopters were used to bring in conference goers. 200 helicopters. Gore also used the conference to announce a massive concert to raise awareness about global warming. Him and pop star Pharrell Williams are calling it Live Earth. It'll be staged in 6 cities across the globe. Not exactly a small carbon footprint. The concert is supposed to build up support for an international climate treaty ahead of the UN summit in Paris later this year. Pharrell says he wants to have humanity harmonize all at once. And I guess that'll be harmonizing, holding hands, singing Kumbaya. He says it's absolutely critical that we build public will for an agreement. Gore told World Economic Forum participants the purpose is to have 1 billion voices with one message, to demand climate action now. So when they talk about making the cities of the world more dense, what are they talking about? This is the stack 'em and pack 'em of Agenda 21. And Agenda 21 is based on climate change. And since Calderon and Gore know the plan is for there to be no southern border in the U.S., they've teamed up to show unity, to make it look like the world is on board with this Delphi technique. And for those of you that don't know what the Delphi technique is, we're going to be talking about that probably a little bit later. It's a manufactured consensus. climate change is based on a manufactured consensus. Now, in case some of you have forgotten about Agenda 21, it's the UN plan for sustainable development based on climate change as the reason, and we all need to give up control of every aspect of our lives to the government. The climate change people call this conspiracy theory, but it's not. Agenda 21 is as real as you and I, and it's just as live as we are right now. So what does Agenda 21 have to do with climate change? Well, this is a redevelopment tool used to push Agenda 21's vision of remaking American cities. With redevelopment, cities have the right to take property by eminent domain against the will of the property owner. They give or sell it to a private developer. The property taxes in that area can be diverted away from the general fund, forcing them to offer less and less services because they don't need it. Everybody is stacked and packed. It reduces you and I's standard of living. They'll be telling you that it's better, that the money gets redirected into the redevelopment agency, and that this redevelopment agency hands it out to developers building low-income housing and mixed-use smart growth. How many times do you hear sustainable development and smart growth? This is all Agenda 21 terminology. Let me read you Chapter 28 of Agenda 21. It calls for each community to formulate its own Agenda 21. And they're trying to guarantee that the entire world signs on to Agenda 21 by making it a local community neighborhood issue, saying that each little neighborhood needs to come up with their own Agenda 21. And they give the neighborhoods the narrative of Agenda 21, say, here are our goals. Talk to your people, talk to your local government, make this happen according to what's happening in your neighborhood. Just make sure everybody's involved. Here's what it says. Each local authority should enter into a dialogue with its citizens, local organizations, and private enterprise and adopt a local Agenda 21. Through consultation and consensus building, local authorities would learn from citizens and from local civic community businesses and industrial organizations and acquire the information needed for formulating the best strategies. Now, this tactic may sound reasonable until you realize that the dedicated stakeholders group, and I'm sure that some of you already have what's called stakeholders, that's Agenda 21 terminology, that organizes and oversees local transformation is not elected by the public, and the people selected to represent the citizens in your community will not present your interests. The chosen partners or professional staff and working groups are implementing a new system of governance without asking your opinion. Now, as most of you know, I broadcast from Oregon. Now, I don't live in Portland, but I'm very close. And in Portland, they have an agency called Metro. Metro is an unelected agency, and it determines things like urban growth boundaries and what kind of construction can be done within these boundaries. And they even try to control areas outside of Portland, even though that doesn't fly very well. Portland has had hundreds of condos built in redevelopment areas, and they're telling everyone that it's a terrible thing if you want your own yard. And let me give you an example of this. Portland built a new 6-story apartment building at the edge of town. It's in an area called the Pearl District. It has, I think, about 250 units. They built this apartment unit with no parking. No parking for the building, and there's no parking on the street. But there is bicycle parking and lots of bike paths and rules and regulations on how traffic has to yield to bicycles. And as a result, these bicycle people are out of control. They don't feel like they have to obey any laws. They ride wherever they want. They run stop signs, go wrong ways down the street. They have the attitude that they have the right of way in every situation. And they will flip you off or just run right in front of you and dare you to hit them. They're very brave, they're very pushy, very rude. So these areas are called human habitation. And all of this is within this urban growth boundaries of the city. Only certain building designs are permitted. Rural property is more and more restricted in what you can use it for. Now, in Portland, and I'm not kidding about this, in Portland, it's against the law to cut down a tree in your yard. You have to get permission and buy a permit. Sometimes you have to have a study done to see what the impact will be if you cut down your tree. And it's all at your expense. And that's before you get a permit, if you get a permit at all. Now, although these counties say that they support agricultural uses and eating local produced food, farmers markets and all of that stuff, the fact is there's so many regulations restricting water and land use. They come up with all kinds of plans, like scenic corridors, area plans, specific plans, redevelopment plans, huge fines and fees. And, as a result of all of this, then the county roads are not being paved. The push is for people to get off of their land, become more dependent, come into the cities, to get out of the suburbs, into the cities, out of their private homes, into condos, out of their private cars, onto bicycles. Let's talk about bicycles. What do bicycles have to do with it? I'm not opposed to riding my bicycle. You may enjoy riding your bicycle. There's nothing wrong with that, right? But bicycle advocacy groups are very powerful now. And advocacy simply means it's a fancy word for lobbying or influencing, and maybe even strong-arming the public and the politicians. So what's the connection with bike groups? Well, national groups like Complete Streets, Thunderhead Alliance, and others, they have training programs where they're teaching their members how to pressure for redevelopment, and they're training candidates for office. It's not just about bike lanes. It's about remaking cities and rural areas to sustainable model. High-density urban development without parking for cars is the goal. This means the whole towns need to be rebuilt in the image of something that goes along with their idea of sustainable development. Bike groups are being used as the shock troops for this plan. And, in the city of Portland, I tell you this, they have taken transportation money. That's money from fees and licensing and gas tax, all of these things that are supposed to be for road repairs, and they've spent it on bicycles, bicycle lanes, bicycle signs. They just built a bridge that crosses the Willamette River in Portland. This is a two-sided suspension bridge. Beautiful, long bridge. It goes across the long part of the river. And this bridge is for bicycles and light rail only. No cars are allowed on it. And this was a multi-million-dollar bridge built with tax dollars out of the transportation fund. Now the city of Portland is getting a lot of complaints because the roads are in pretty bad shape. There's big potholes. The roads are in bad shape. So now they want to institute a new tax, a city tax, calling it a road tax that everyone would pay. And they're saying you don't have a choice. We're gonna charge you this tax so that we can fix the roads. When the fact is, they took the money for the roads and spent it on all of this bicycle garbage. Let me tell you how this whole thing has worked with the light rail. And this is a little off subject, but this is such a dirty little scam. I have to tell you about this. This started with a parking meter controversy in downtown Portland. Now, you probably have those parking meters where, you have to feed the meter, you put the coin in, you twist the little handle, and the meter comes up and tells you how much time you have before you have to feed the meter again. Well, the city of Portland said that their meters were so worn out and taking so much maintenance to maintain them that they needed to buy new meters. So, the people in Portland said, well, I guess that's reasonable. So what the city did was they went out and shopped for digital parking meters. These are thousands of dollars each. Now, Portland is not a huge city, but their downtown parking is, there's got to be probably a couple thousand of these parking meters. And these parking meters are very expensive, but they went to the people and said, it's okay because we get a 40% match from the federal government to buy these parking meters. So the people said, oh, all right, well, that's cool. So here's what the city did. They ordered these parking meters costing millions and millions of dollars for parking meters. And before they took delivery, they sold these parking meters to another company and then leased them back from this company. Now, why would they do that? Well, let's say they spent $100 million. or they cost $100 million. They get a 40% match from the federal government. That means 40 million of that comes from the federal government. The city's only putting out 60 million. So before they take delivery, they sell these to someone else for about the same price and then lease them back. Well, in the meantime, they get their 60 million back that they put out in the first place, plus they get the 40 million from the federal government. And then they take the attitude that it's not costing the city anymore. This is a free $40 million from the federal government. Assuming that we're so stupid that we don't realize that the federal government also gets their money from us. So we're paying for it. The people are paying for it either way. We pay state and federal tax. So they just made $40 million. You know, the light rail system, which includes light rail, the bus system, and the streetcar system, are insolvent. They take such a huge loss that there's no way for them to sustain it without massive funds. So in order to pay the daily bills, they've taken the same strategy, put it toward light rail. Now, light rail is a much bigger number than the parking meters. These light rail cars can cost $150,000, $200,000 a piece. So to build the light rails, the actual physical rails, can cost up to $8 or $10 million a mile. Well, from building the light rail and from buying the light rail cars, they also get this 40% match. So you can see where I'm going with this. In order for them, because they're insolvent, in order for them to pay their daily bills, then they have to build light rail and get that 40% match plus their own money back in order to pay the daily bills. So little things are happening like this. Right outside of Portland, we have Beaverton, Lake Oswego, these suburbs, separate cities, but suburbs kind of Portland. And they want to build light rail out into those. Well, the people in these towns, like Milwaukee, for instance, people of Milwaukee said that they didn't want light rail going through their town. So the city government said, well, we've already signed a deal for it. They said, no, we're going to do a referendum and put it to the vote of the people. So it went before a vote of the people, and the people said no. So the city government reworded it and put it on the ballot again. The second time, the people said, no, we don't want light rail. So they reworded it again, added a couple things, took a couple things out, put it on the ballot again. A third time, the people said, no, we don't want light rail going through our town. So the city government took it out of the transportation department and put it into a department that doesn't require voter approval and put it through anyway. So even though the people in that town voted no on it 3 times, you can drive through that town and they're building it right through the middle of their town, this light rail system that the people said no on. Because they have to continually build this light rail and go through the little parking meter scam where they buy this stuff, sell it before they take delivery, take that 40% match because they're so insolvent. It's the only way they can pay their bills. I know it's a little off topic, but it's just such a dirty little scam. I had to share that with you. But this whole bicycle thing kind of started it, with spending all the transportation money on the bicycle thing. And the bicycles don't have any licensing, no fees, no tax. They don't contribute any money to create all of these bike lanes or all of the stuff that goes with that. So this whole thing, besides the light rail rant that I just went on, back to the Agenda 21, the whole plan it's a whole life plan. It involves the education system, the energy system, the transportation system, the governmental system, the healthcare system, food production. The plan is to restrict your choices, to limit your funds, to narrow your freedoms, and to take away your voice. One of the ways that they're doing this is this Delphi technique that I talked about earlier. This is a manufactured consensus. Global warming has a manufactured consensus. They say it's a settled science, that there's a consensus. How many times have we been told that the government's doing what the people want? That there's this big consensus about whatever it is. About climate change. People said it's settled science. There's a consensus among scientists that climate change is man-made. But that's not how science is determined. Science is determined when scientists come up with something that's proven when anyone can reproduce it with the same results. But there's over 30,000 scientists worldwide that said the climate models are wrong, that that's not science. So, friends, that's not science. When the UN crafted Agenda 21, they used 72 climate models that predicted dire consequences in a very short few years if we don't act on global warming immediately. Well, it turns out all 72 climate models were wrong. Al Gore predicted 7 years ago the North Pole would be completely liquidated by 2014 due to the impending threat of global warming. Well, reports have found that his impetuous predictions are in fact result is opposite. A dramatic increase in the amounts covering the poles. The Daily Mail explains that the phenomenon is unquestionable, noting that some estimates include the polar ice cap has grown by 63% over just the last 2 years. That increase represents an area of at least the size of Alaska, and in some studies, more than 1 million square miles of ice that was liquid in 2012 is now ice. Gore said in 2006 there'd be somewhere around a 20-foot rise in sea level in 10 years. Well, there's only a year and a half left, and the most they can eke out is about 23 inches in 20 years. And that's just part of a normal cycle that the Earth has gone through many times before. And this is no different. It's just a part of the natural cycle. None of the climate models or estimates of man-made global warming has happened. Al Gore's didn't happen. The UN's climate models didn't happen. But they need global warming in order to implement Agenda 21, because Agenda 21 is based on climate change. The control of all people, a one world government. So the march goes on. You know, part of this agenda is to groom future candidates for local office. Another is to sponsor non-governmental groups that go into schools and train children. How many times do you see them trying to indoctrinate our kids? Another is to offer federal and private grants for funding for city programs in order to push their agenda. They want to educate a new generation of land use planners. Another is to convert factories to other use, introduce energy measures that penalize manufacturing, set energy consumption goals back to 1985 levels. Another is to allow unregulated immigration. This is in order to lower our standards and use up local resources so that we have no choice but to stack them and pack them. They try to distract us by trying to bring up issues that take our eyes off the ball. The gay marriage agenda. Why do you think the Obama administration is pushing this wacky transgender gay marriage agenda, gun rights things? He knows that'll fire us up. And even though he knows the anti-gun lobby will never succeed, but he pushes it because behind the scenes, while we're not looking, him and his cronies are implementing all of these Agenda 21 policies. And they're very successful. And do you know why? Because we're too busy trying to defend our rights to pay attention to what they're really doing. Some people really do want all of these things. Gun control, immigration, open border policies, all of this. But all the powers that be have to do is fill their staff and cabinet with these nuts and simply let them do their thing. There's no better distraction than a bunch of clowns that really believe in these things. It puts the distraction agenda on autopilot. Let me share a story with you here from WND. A sheriff in Fulton County, New York, has taken on the state's anti-gun establishment by defying an attempt to have legal handgun owners recertify their right to bear arms with the state bureaucracy. Now, I'm not kidding about this. New York adopted a sweeping SAFE Act legislation in 2013, with most of the attention is focused on a ban on assault rifles and high-capacity clips. But a little-known provision of the bill requires every handgun owner to recertify their permit with the local sheriff or clerk's office by 2018. The counties are then required to upload the permit information into a statewide digital database that's being created. The process must be repeated every 5 years. The state has sent out 500 invitations to gun owners in several counties, asking them to participate in an early pilot program. They're asked to go online, upload their information on each gun they own. Sheriff Thomas Laurie of Fulton County volunteered his county to participate in the program, only so he could send a message to the bureaucrats in the state capitol, including Andrew Cuomo. He said, "I'm asking everyone that gets those invitations to throw them in the garbage because that's where they belong." Laurie said at a recent meeting with conservative activists, they go into the garbage because for 100 years or more, ever since the inception of pistol permits, nobody has ever been required to renew them. The state wants to roll out the new online registration database by February, he said. I don't think they're going to be able to do it. Let's have everyone's permit expire the same day and let them see what they're going to do with that. In the meantime, Laurie added, I want to assure you that everyone in Fulton County has nothing to fear from the sheriff's office. We've got real crime and real criminals to occupy our time with. Well, this New York SAFE Act stands for New York Secure Ammunition and Firearms Enforcement Act, which was passed in January of 2013 and signed into law by Governor Andrew Cuomo in response to the mass shooting at Sandy Hook. Similar legislation has passed the legislature in Maryland, Colorado, Connecticut in the wake of that same tragedy. Now, in Connecticut, thousands of gun owners have refused to comply with the sweeping new gun control laws. The revolt is underway. Gun Owners of America leader Larry Pratt told WND in a previous story about Connecticut's refuse-nick gun owners, tens of thousands of people in Connecticut have intentionally missed the deadline. They're not registering. Some of them actually said they wouldn't when they were at the hearing at the legislature. Well, Laurie seems to be leading a similar revolt in New York. I'll post that on the website. You can go see it there. Well, according to WND, 10 states have taken the first step toward limiting the power of the federal government. Officials from Arizona, Massachusetts, Missouri, Montana, New Hampshire, New Jersey, North Dakota, South Carolina, Virginia, and Wyoming have filed resolutions calling for conventions of state that would propose amendments to the U.S. Constitution with the express purpose of limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. Now, this is Article 5 of the Constitution that gives the states the power to call such a convention. And this article reads, in part, the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to the Constitution or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution, when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as to one of the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congresses. Well, Mark Meckler, president of Citizens for Self-Governance, co-founded a Convention of States project, which is currently working to convince the necessary 34 legislatures to pass bills calling for a convention of states. As long as all of the applying states call for a convention to deal with the same issue, Congress must call the convention into session. Meckler said that in addition to the 10 states that have already filed, he expects another 15 to 20 states to file resolutions for a convention in the next few weeks. We will have legislation introduced in enough states to get 34, Meckler said. He made it clear that filing a resolution is not enough. A state legislature must vote to pass it in order to make it official. He said the need for the states to limit federal power did not suddenly arise overnight. He believes a convention like this should have been held years ago, but he thinks people are now only beginning to understand the power that Article 5 gives the states. Well, I hope that our discussion about what's going on behind the scenes here will make you think maybe in a little bit different way. I want you to share this with other people who will listen to it. Now, I'm going to get a ton of hate mail from this, and I welcome that. I welcome it because that means I'm doing my job. So if you would like to send a counter hate mail, my email address is contact@wdeanshook.com. The webpage where I'll post these stories and other stories is wdeanshook.com. Join me on Twitter, wdeanshook. Facebook is wdeanshook. And as usual, when the dust settles and the smoke clears, be back with more news the mainstream media will never touch. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it very much.
You can get these full stories and more at wdeanshook.com. That's wdeanshook.com.